Hi guys, and welcome back to My Dank Dog. Just as a quick reminder, I live in Canada. It's been legal here since 2018. I've been editing this video for a while. I was debating how I was going to put it together, but basically I want to kind of weigh up the pros and cons of doing a DWC overall, whether it's worth the extra cost, the extra water, and the extra effort in comparison to a Coco as well. So let's get into it. Big shout out to Vivosun for sponsoring the channel. And if you guys are looking to get a V-Grow, you can save 20% off at vivosun.com and Amazon stores with my promo code MDDVGROW. That's MDDVGROW. Also guys, you can save 15% off at vivosun.com and Amazon stores with my promo code MyDankDog, and that's site-wide with no minimum purchase. This grow is in the Vivosun 2x4 Grow Tent Pro kit using the Vivosun 5-gallon DWC versus a 5-gallon Coco grow in a fabric pot. We're under the 200-watt Aerolite wing lights, and I've got to say guys, this has been a bit of a challenge at times, definitely a learning experience, but something that I will definitely be trying again. Before we get started, I'm actually going to show you a time lapse of my second DWC grow. I just thought I would show you how kind of hypnotizing it is to watch these ladies grow inside a DWC. Now they grow really fast. This is an auto. I haven't grown a photo inside a DWC. I've just concentrated on growing 2 autos and they grow really fast. So there's a lot of things to consider. Basically, after I started my first grow, I realized that I'd made a few oversights and tried to rectify that immediately for this video by doing a second grow straight away so that I could highlight a few observations and tips and show you whether they work rather than just having a video that is kind of open-ended with some theories of better things to do. These are a few things to consider before you're starting a DWC. Plan your training. Now you've got 13 or 14 liters of water in a 5-gallon bucket, which means that your mobility is down. You're not really going to be taking these pots in and out. I don't like trellis nets, and also that probably would have complicated things even further. So what I decided to do was experiment with some adhesive clips around the rim of the pot, like you would see grommets placed on a fabric pot with LST hoops. And basically what I wanted to try and avoid was the plant growing like a triangle with a kind of main central cola. What I wanted was a even spread and canopy. Again, I wasn't going to use a trellis because I knew that I had to take the lids on and off to change the water, and a trellis definitely would have complicated this. So I added LST rings to the side of the rim, and as you can see, it worked out really well. The next thing is clean your pebbles. When you get these, they have a lot of clay powder all over them, and I actually washed these pebbles about 10 times prior to putting them in the basket for my DWC. I thought I'd got rid of all of the clay powder and chips because I did it until the water ran clean, but it wasn't enough. So basically clean your pebbles, then clean them again and clean them again. The third thing is plan how you intend to change your reservoir. Now each one of my 5-gallon buckets had 13 to 14 liters of water in it. So it's pretty heavy, and obviously that does not allow you to be very mobile with these ladies in the buckets. So I invested in a water exchange pump, which allowed me to pump out the old nutrient mix into an external bucket of a similar size. And then once I had emptied this and tipped it away, I could remix some new nutrients in this bucket and then simply pump it back into the DWC reservoir. So this was a good investment. $20, Amazon, no brainer for me. It simply allowed me to pump the old nutrients out and the new nutrients in with limited hassle. The tube is very slim, so I didn't even have to move the DWC bucket lid too much either. Alright, let's get into it. Back in December 2024, I was at MJ BizCon in Las Vegas. On the way there, I spotted this sign for Royal Queen beans and I took down the booth number. I quickly found them once I was inside the conference and spoke to this guy, Max. He gave me a quick rundown of RQS and everything they have to offer, and I managed to walk away with a few samples of Medusa and Orion. When I got home, I cracked 2 of the Medusas, and my thinking was basically I'll do a grow off. 1 in DWC, 1 in Coco, and see if there's a huge difference in growing. Now, obviously, I expected DWC to be a lot bigger and a lot quicker, but how much bigger and how much quicker compared to Coco, I wasn't sure. If I was to run this back again, I would actually probably add a drip irrigation to the Coco, and I think that would actually bring the results closer to each other. After 2 weeks germinating in Rockwool, you can see the roots had started to pop through the bottom on both of the Medusas. I had problems germinating the Orion that you can see in the background just on the right there. I tried to save her, but unfortunately it didn't work out, so I'll grow Orion at another time. But right now I was just going to transplant the 2 Medusas, one to this Vivosun 5-gallon DWC. Now this 5-gallon reservoir takes about 13 to 14 litres of water. I'm also going to grow in this 5-gallon Coco fabric pot with a cocoa and perlite mix. We're going to expand one of these Canna Coco bricks and mix in about 70% cocoa with 30% perlite. Then I transplanted one of the Medusas, including its Rockwool cube, into the DWC, and the other Medusa, including its Rockwool cube, into the cocoa perlite mix. After a bit of research, I decided to go with advanced nutrients for the grow, and I went with Sensi Coco Grow and Sensi Coco Bloom. Now, I've used advanced nutrients in the past. I do find that you need to kind of reduce the dosages on the back of the bottles that they suggest to probably around 60 or 75% of the recommended dosage. I normally end up with a good grow on there. When I follow their recommended dosages, I tend to get some nutrient burn. I also invested into some rhino skin for strength of the stalks, and I'm going to be using this in the cocoa as well as the DWC. I also invested into some Sensi Zim. Now this is specifically for the root health in the DWC. And then I also got some PK 1314 for the bloom stage. Now obviously I needed to use a pH meter reading when mixing the nutrients, but I also used some pH up and down so that I could mix the range of 5.8 and 6.1 for DWC and Coco. So we're off to the races. I decided to concentrate a time lapse on the DWC, and after my first week I ran into my first problem. The Coco was looking fine, nice and healthy. As you would imagine, everything seemed okay. The DWC, on the other hand, was showing signs of damage from the splash at the top of the DWC. Now, I didn't know anything about a splash guard. This is my first DWC, but I thought that she would grow quickly and grow out of the range of the splash. As you can see on the time lapse, the spray was landing on the leaves and burning it. It was actually drying and burning and curling up some of the leaves. At the bottom there, you can see just how bad it was. So I was hoping that she was going to grow quite tall quite quickly and be out of the range of this splash, but it didn't work out, and actually some of the leaves started to curl up and really kind of crisp because of all of that nutrient mixed water that was landing on the leaves and drying out. The bottom leaves looked like a little bit of a mess, so I actually did a little bit of research online and saw that a lot of people create a splash cover to stop this happening. The Coco grow was looking nice and healthy. There are a couple of mutated leaves and one or two that had a very kind of minor variegation on them, but everything seemed fine. It was just these crispy damaged leaves from the water splash on the DWC that freaked me out. At first I thought it was nutrient burn, but then realized there's no tip burn, which is a kind of giveaway. And then it couldn't have been a deficiency, not so early in its life expectancy. So I basically did a bit of research online and found out that a lot of people create a splash guard or a splash cover to avoid this issue, and it's actually quite common. So as soon as I saw that, I kind of just chilled out and decided to chop off these damaged leaves. Now, unfortunately, the whole plant had actually been sprayed and there were signs of damage on the top leaves too, but nowhere near as bad or as severe as the bottom leaves. So I basically chopped off the crispiest or the most damaged leaves and left the rest of the plant alone, hoping that she would grow pretty quickly and avoid the splash in future. If we look at the roots on the basket, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I know that a DWC produces a huge root ball at later stages of the plant, but everything seemed to look okay to me. I was more concerned with the colour and the kind of dirtiness of the reservoir. As you can see, there's a ton of clay sediment at the bottom there, and I cleaned the pebbles at least 10 times. I washed them until they were clean, the water was clean off them, but obviously it wasn't good enough because there was a ton of clay sediment and, as you can see, clay chips that were coming out of the reservoir. So I decided to do a process of elimination. I was going to empty the reservoir of the nutrient mix and clean it of the clay sediment, and then continue to feed the plant from above with the same nutrient mix to see whether the burn continued. If the burn continued, then I know that it was my nutrient mix. If the burn stopped, then I knew that it was the splash and potentially the sediment in the water from the reservoir that was damaging the leaves. We will see if my kind of theory works out in the next week or so. It did take me quite a while to clean the reservoir. I ended up pumping out all of the water and nutrient mix as well as much sediment as I could get. I then cleaned the rest out with a bunch of towels and cloths and left this bucket empty for the next week or so whilst I fed the plant from the top with the same nutrient mix to see if the burn continued. With the Coco, I gave her a little trim. There was no problems here, but I was realizing that I was using a lot of new things, so there was a lot of new things that could go wrong. One of them is just simply new nutrients. Working out the whole kind of mix and dosages is definitely tricky when you're first using a new set of nutrients. So I felt as if I was going to have a few more problems that I had to narrow down. The leaves on the Coco had a couple of mutations on them, as you can see here, but she was looking fine. There was a little bit of variegation on there. There was some slight yellowing, but nothing to worry about. I get this in general when I first have a new shoot until it kind of catches up to itself and gets a good nutrient regime going and gets a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. So after a trim, no problems there. Everything was good. If we look at the DWC for the next week, I was hand feeding her with a syringe and the same nutrient mix, and the burn had stopped. The only damage that was on the plant was the kind of aftermath of the spray that I hadn't yet trimmed off. So I was confident at this stage that it wasn't the nutrient mix that was causing the problem. She started to grow pretty quickly from hand feeding, but I was confident at this stage that it wasn't my nutrient mix and it was the splash from the DWC. If we take a look at Coco, you can see that she's grown quite a bit in height and her leaves are looking nice and green and pert. So it's about time for me to give her some LST. So we'll take a quick look at DWC first. The leaves at the bottom there that are damaged are actually the ones that I didn't trim off the first time round. So we're going to take off those pre-damaged leaves now. And it was about this time that I started to realize, how the hell was I going to do some LST on this one? I just hadn't thought about where I was going to attach the training wire. I didn't really want to use a bud clips because I didn't want to run the risk of snapping stalks. I've had that happen a couple of times recently. There's no trellis net in here because I just don't like trellis nets in general, but also it would have complicated this grow a lot more too. So yeah, I definitely hadn't thought out how I was going to LST the DWC. I did remove the damaged leaves. Now, if you take a look at these leaves, you could mistake it for a deficiency or a burn. Obviously, it's got no burnt tips, so that's a dead giveaway that it's not nutrient burn and that it is from something else. Also, the pattern is very speckled, and you can see it in the time lapses where the water hits the leaves, it burns. This is the LST that I applied to Coco. As you can see, pretty straightforward. I stapled her down at a 90-degree angle, and that's basically going to allow the light from above to reach those nodes and leaves at the bottom of the kind of plant and not just have the light hit the top of the plant. And that's going to encourage those stalks and nodes at the bottom to have further or quicker growth. I also decided to add a LST frame or a metal frame to the Coco at the edges, which is going to allow me to attach training wire to the stalks and eventually kind of like spread her out equally around the pot. Again, I kind of want a flat canopy. I don't want the Christmas tree single kind of cola effect going on. So she's nice and set up for some LST. I started the DWC again, switched it on for the second time. Hopefully the burn wasn't going to affect the leaves again this time. And as soon as I switched the DWC on, as you can see, she started to grow pretty damn quickly. So I was happy about that. It was a good response. The nutrients weren't the culprit for the burnt leaves. It was definitely the splash from the top of the DWC. I think in future I'd probably look into making myself a splash cover or see if I can buy one. If you've got any suggestions, guys, let me know. But as you can see, as soon as I switched this DWC on, she grew crazy fast, and you can see a little bit of Coco there in the bottom right growing too. So as we get into week 4, the growth is pretty astounding on DWC. She's already starting to get bud sites, so it's amazing just how she grew in about a week, maybe a little over a week, a few days over a week. And Coco also grew pretty nicely too. I'd been doing some LST as I'd checked in on her every single day, so a little bit of fiddling here and there, a little bit of defoliation and pulling all of those stalks out to the rim of the pot as well. In future, I wouldn't use a fabric pot without grommets. I'm not a fan of the metal frames, but I couldn't get over how fast this DWC lady had grown and just how advanced she was, and starting to show her bud sites just in a week. So really, really kind of starting to kind of absorb how effective a DWC grow could be in comparison to a Coco grow here, which is still a nice plant and it's still growing nicely and big, but nothing in comparison to the DWC. If I checked in on the roots, they were looking pretty good too, but still not massive. So I'm not sure if that's generally a good size for this age, but I was expecting a huge root ball. Just didn't know when it was going to hit. So this is 4 weeks of transplant, but actually plant is about 6 weeks old. So it's a good time for it to start getting bud sites. I was changing the reservoir every week to 10 days. And that's when you realize as well that it's pretty expensive to do a DWC. The amount of water that you use is probably about double. This bucket contains about 13 to 14 litres of water, and also the nutrient mix that is going in there as well. So rough estimate, I'd say you use double the amount of water and double the amount of nutrients for a DWC. So it's definitely something to consider and weigh up at the end of the grow. You can also see there's a lot more clay sediment at the bottom there. I'd completely cleaned this bucket out, so I'm still getting clay powder off the pebbles. Again, just going to emphasize, clean your pebbles and clean them again, and then once you've cleaned them, clean them again. But Yeah, it's all a learning curve for me, this first one. There were so many things to take in, and that's another thing. I'd put so many variables into this grow, new nutrients, new tent, new lights, new growing method. There was a lot to kind of keep check on. So when something did go wrong or these problems in there, I had to kind of guess. Whereas if I was to do this again, maybe I would just change one thing at a time or two things at a time. But she was looking good after week 4. As you can see, the leaves are looking nice and healthy. The tips have got a little bit of a twinge of lightness to them, but overall, I'm happy with how she's looking at week 4. If we take a look at Coco, there's a few light areas on her leaves, a yellowish tinge. Now, obviously, this is going to happen when a plant has a dramatic growth spurt. They need more nutrients. Also, I find it happens a lot more in Coco because Coco does not hold on to the nutrients as well as something like soil. So it's easy to fix in Coco because it's easy to flush and it's easy to add in Coco. That's one of the benefits in comparison to soil. She's starting to get a nice canopy there and spread out. So overall, she's looking pretty good. The LST is starting to pay off. As we go into week 5 and take a look at the buds grow on the DWC, this is just amazing every time I see a time lapse of these plants growing, but it's really great to see the buds kind of singled out this way. You can notice there's definitely some nutrient burn on the tips of the leaves here. Now, I was expecting to have something a lot worse. I was expecting nutrient issues just because the kind of base of the roots here is in direct contact with your nutrient mix. So I knew it was my first time and I knew I was going to have problems with the nutrients, but overall she's looking pretty good and there's nothing really major or drastic going wrong with this plant. As we go into week 6, you can see both of these ladies have grown and put some weight on, but the height difference is pretty much drastic. The leaves are looking nice. Everything's looking pretty good. The Coco is just a lot lower. Now it has had some LST as well, kind of spread that canopy out. But if we just look in comparison to the size and growth of the DWC, it's not comparable. The plant looks almost twice the size. Now I'm going to have to do some LST on the DWC. I've decided to put some wire and attach it to the rim of the lid, but she's getting tall, as you can see. This is what I wanted to kind of avoid. I didn't want that central cola, but the leaves are looking good. She's looking pretty good. Everything has seemed to kind of start to level out, so no complaints there. The lightness on the Coco grow is still there. These nutrients are obviously new to me, so I'm trying to work out the quirks of the nutrients in both the DWC and the Coco here. But overall, nothing major, just a few kind of like frosty burned tips. But she is growing like so high. It's crazy. I'm going to start by giving Coco a bit of defoliation and then a little bit more LST. But if we take a closer look at the bottom of her kind of growth here, she's looking good underneath. Great light penetration, and you can also see how I've used those metal frames for the LST. But I'm going to spread her branches out just a little bit more and see if I can get a wider canopy going on. As you can see, it's pretty easy to spread her out. There's a nice kind of star effect from above. You can see just how the light penetrates nice and deep down into the plant. So she's looking great. It was just a little bit more kind of tugging and pulling on these wires and branches here towards the circumference of that frame that I put inside the fabric pot. I would advise not to use this frame and probably use a fabric pot with training holes or grommets already in it. If I take a look at the DWC, I'm obviously thinking now how I'm going to do some LST at the bottom. She's got a nice thick stalk there, but the shape of the plant is getting just very Christmas tree like. So I gave her a trim and I decided to use some of the training wire and attach it to the rim of the bucket. Now, this is not ideal. I'm obviously going to have to detach it once I take the lid off and give her a kind of change of reservoir, but it was the best solution that I could come up with, kind of get a bit more spread on these lower branches. Again, you saw at the beginning of the video on my second DWC grow, I actually used adhesive hooks around the edge, and that worked out a lot better. So do pay attention to how you intend to train your plants, especially in DWC. I think moving forward, I would definitely add the hooks to the rim of the pot and train that way. I would still avoid using a trellis just because it's a pain in the bum when you take the lid off these DWC buckets and you don't want your kind of main cola get mangled and tangled up in a DWC continuously. It's a little bit scary to see your plants after you've given them a heavy defoliation. They look like skin and bones, and I always feel as if I've hurt them and damaged them and they're never going to grow back. But as you can see, within 1 week, these ladies have just kind of shrugged it off, grown thick foliage again and packed on some weight on the buds. So it's always fascinating to see these ladies grow back in a time lapse. Very hypnotizing. As we end week 6 and start to go into week 7, I gave the ladies another defoliation, just a small one this time. As you can see, they've packed on some huge weight on the colas. That central cola is looking massive at the moment, and then the colas around the edge are also looking pretty good too. There's a massive difference in the way these two plants are growing. The Coco is much smaller in kind of overall appearance. The buds are smaller, the leaves are smaller, but she has got a better canopy. I don't think she would be as tall even if I didn't do the LST on her. I think the size and the weight of the DWC is just almost double. It's like twice the size of the leaves, twice the size of the buds, and then twice the height as well. So there's definitely a huge difference in the two plants. As you can see there on the far right, that's a new DWC grow on the go, the Sour Girl Auto that you saw at the beginning of this video. These plants are smelling great. It reminds me of White Widow for some reason. There's a smell that is very similar to White Widow. So yeah, very happy with how this grow is going at the end of week 6 going into week 7. Stay tuned for the next episode. Keep all the likes, all the comments, all the advice coming. I do appreciate it. And big shout out to Vivosun for sponsoring the channel. Bye bye.